You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
I'm sure there are a few people you've never thought you'd see on here. White Jesus, Donald Trump, and probably a police officer. Well, you're wrong about one of those. And that's why I want to welcome you to theGrio Daily, the only podcast that is sitting down with Harry Dunn, the Capitol Police Officer from January 6th. Today we're going to invite Capitol Police Officer and now author Harry Dunn to the podcast, who is the author of the book, Standing My Ground, A Capitol Police Officer's Fight for Accountability and Good Trouble After January 6th. So welcome to the podcast, Mr. Dunn. How are you doing today?
Hey, Michael, I'm glad to be on with you. I'm doing well. I'm honored to be with you. I'm a big fan of your shows, and I like talking with you.
Yeah, so we're going to jump on into it. I read your book, and I think, other people should read it because it really is kind of an interesting, backstory or a look into the opposite perspective from January 6th, looking at how it was seen from an officer's standpoint. But first, I want to ask you, what made you want to become a police officer?
Well, in my book, I talk about, I initially didn't want to be a police officer. I thought I was going to be a basketball player, a football player. I had aspirations of making it to the league. I played in college, and my short-lived professional career didn't work out the way I wanted it to be. But I've always had this inkling, and I can attribute it to my parents, this inkling in me to want to serve and help people. My father is retired veteran in the Air Force. So I've had this duty to country and to serve people. And I've always cared about people. I've always been looked at as the big brother type person, maybe my stature, I'm 6'7", so I've always been bigger than people. So I've always had the desire and the notion to look out for people. So why not try my hand at policing, which is in my opinion, the ultimate act of community service.
This is always interesting for me to hear those origin stories. Did you think of policing as community service? And you being a Black man in America, you have to ask, how you came up with the idea that to equate policing with community service.
So I'm fortunate, but first of all, let's back up. I'm not going to pretend at all that there's not a problem with the police culture in America, because it definitely is, and it needs to be addressed, rectified. Too many people are suffering at the hands of this system that needs overhauling. However, growing up, I grew up in middle-class suburban America, and I never really had I can't point to bad interactions I had with police, growing up. Not saying that they didn't exist. I didn't have those interactions, and I was blind to them until I started getting older and paying attention and listening to my friends' stories and accounts that they've had. So yes, I do equate it to community service, but I don't believe that let me back up. I do believe that individuals can and have every right to be skeptical when they hear somebody equate the two, community service and policing.
Well, one of the things we talk about on this podcast is, the unintentional conflation of those two things, right? The system and individual police officers, right? Individual police officers are upholding a system, and what, the criticisms are of the system and not individual police officers, right? Like, you can't criticize firemen for wetting things, right? Or spraying their hoses on and ruining your couch if your house was on fire. And so I always want to point out, because people think, well, you're so critical of police that, I thought you didn't like police officers. I'm critical of the system, right? Like, you can't get in there and make it better than the system that is around you. But I want to move further along in your story, right? Because when you became a Capitol police officer, you talk in the book about previous protests, right? The Tea Party protests and the other bigger protests, Million Man March. Going into, and I know the answer because I read the book, but going into the January 6th protest, was the feeling of you and your fellow officers different than even the previous protests that you served in and been a member of protecting the people in the Capitol at?
So first of all, I want to make clear that I don't attempt or never will speak for any of my other coworkers. I begged and pleaded with others to tell their stories because everybody has a different story from that day. So what I'm telling you is my account, my experiences, and I got criticized for saying I was speaking for all law enforcement. No, I'm speaking for myself as an individual, as an American, as a Black man who happens to be a police officer in this country. So, I just want to make that clear from the start. But, going into it, I thought it was just going to be a regular First Amendment protest. And as you see, with all the investigations that came out from the January 6th committee, the Jack Smith, the juries, and all the cases that have been going on, that a lot of stuff was out there that we didn't know about. We, meaning the frontline officers, that would have helped us been better prepared for what we did encounter that day. So I did expect a protest, but nothing to the level of what, January 6th wasn't a protest, it was a riot, and that's exactly what it was. So no, I did not expect a riot.
Okay, and one of the things you asked in the book, so I know as an author myself, right, like when you finish the book, if you ask two important questions, like why, one, were you guys given so much equipment, riot helmets and stuff like that before this when you hadn't received them in any other protests? And then you asked why, some officers were specifically told like to put theirs, at a distance, and then what you say, I think, sprint to get them if things go bad. Have you received answers to those questions?
Not directly. I guess one of the things that they're working on is just making sure that what happened doesn't happen again. The story about, the individuals sprinting to their equipment, that was, I wanted to give a platform to other individual officers who I call heroes that day, heroes and sheroes. And that was a story from one of my coworkers who bravely served that day. And that wasn't my experience. To answer your question, no, I have not been given an answer to that. But I do know that they are working to make sure that those issues were addressed in the hearings that I watched. They were public. The Senate did hearings, and they had an inspector general give recommendations, and those recommendations have been addressed. But I don't know the reason why. But
if you were, looking back, like having it already experienced that day, what are the changes that you would have made to keep the Capitol safer, to keep yourself safer and your fellow officers safer?
Man, that's interesting. I've never been asked that before. What could we have done different? Luckily, I say this luckily, but I'm just a rank and file officer. Like you said, I interact with the people. I'm not the one that's out there making the decisions. But just looking back over it all, just more people. How do you stop? There wasn't some like magic code word we could have said like go home or anything like that. What happened? How did we get the Capitol back under control? We had more people. More people showed up. Reinforcements showed up. Help showed up. So I think if you had that to start with, then I can't say it wouldn't have happened. I mean, these individuals had the president of the United States tell them that they were right. But I do know that, more people is what helped extinguish that fire, so to speak. So I guess that's one way to think that could have helped us from the start.
The 80s gave us unforgettable songs from Bob Marley, De La Soul, and Public Enemy.
I'm a black man, and I can never be a veteran.
Being Black the 80s is a podcast docuseries hosted by me, Torre, looking at the most important issues of the 80s through the songs of the decade.
Can I have another hit? The dope man said, I don't give a
A decade when crack kingpins controlled the streets, but lost their humanity.
You couldn't be like no soft, smiling, happy-go-lucky drug dealer. You had to suppress that.
It was a time when disco was part of gay liberation.
It provided the information to counter narratives that were given to gay people by the straight world.
This is the funkiest history class you'll ever take. Join me, Torre, for Being Black the 80s on the GRIO Black Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.
You talk about, kind of seeing a online meme that was, or a message between some of the people who were participating in the riot, explaining what they were going to do, and you kind of dismissed it. Do you think that the anticipation, like the experience that you had in other, protests or gatherings or rallies at the Capitol was the reason you dismissed that? Or I want you to be honest, right? Do you think it was the fact that it was just white people, like the cream of the crop American white people, like the top line white people?
No,
that
I don't think that
kind of
one bit.
made you.
I don't think that one bit. We can go to that right now. No, not at all. I think my reaction had to do with basically what I saw in start year 16 in November, middle November. And, I've seen all kinds of protests. I've seen the Tea Parties up there. I've seen, the Black Lives Matter, the Million Man March. I've seen everything. But I do believe that, no, I don't think it had anything to do with that. But nobody up until that day had ever attempted to do what they did on January 6th. There might have been officers who, pulled a hamstring or something chasing after somebody, but the level of violence and savagery that we were treated with and we were met with by these so-called patriots, it wasn't because we didn't take them lightly because of who they were. Or at least I didn't. I'm going to say, I don't speak for everybody else, but I didn't take them lightly because of who they were, just because I could have never fathomed the day where the president of the United States emboldened people to go overthrow an election.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you.
I don't want to belabor the point, but we've seen the officers and the groups that were protecting the Capitol react differently when there were Black protesters in the area, right?
No, I got to push back a little bit against that. And like I said, I can speak just to Capitol Police. I'm not talking about Metropolitan Police Department. Right. I'm talking your service. But Black Lives Matter did come up to the Capitol, and hell, we had officers that at times took knees with them in solidarity. So the response is totally different. I got to push back that we treated them differently. We treat people given their opportunity to express their First Amendment right given by the Constitution. But once they cross that line and they are no longer participating in freedom of expression, freedom of speech, then they turn violent like we saw on January 6th, and we have to respond accordingly.
Right. And again, I'm not speaking to you specifically. I'm talking about the institution and some of those, agencies that were at the Capitol that day were also part of the Black Lives Matter protests that we saw, a couple months earlier. But the second question I have for you, or the next question I have for you is, has this and what happened and what you experienced, has it in any way made you look differently at this country and, the political system as a whole?
I used to enjoy being a police officer, even when, with all I take it, I do my job honorably. I treat people whether they like me or not. People look at me and just, curse my name without even knowing me, just because of the badge that I wear and what it represents. And that's fine. I don't treat anybody differently based on how they view my profession or view me. My job is to protect and serve people. And, as police officers, we're servants, we're public servants. But that's what we all should aim and strive to be. However, after January 6th, a lot of that was stripped away from me. I don't like it anymore. I don't find joy in it. I don't do it because I like it. I'm still here because it's necessary now. I used to enjoy it, but now it's just, it's like you have to do this. I wanted to say it was a calling, not really a calling, but it's like I don't have a choice, man. Look, because of my country, the country is in a hell of a state right now, and who knows if democracy's going to hold. But at least I'm feeling like I'm doing something, some little part by protecting these members, or like you referred to it, the institution, that it still can stand. And that's the thing what a democracy is, whether we agree with individuals or not. Everybody has a say in it. And the say is not by violence, which we, protected it against on January 6th.
No, so of course I have to ask if you thought, like, if you don't know if there's anything that could have been done on that day, then how are you so confident that you are still protecting what we call democracy? How, you've seen how fragile it is, right? And if you are on that front line between the ripping down of democracy, you know that it could be easily trespassed, then how are you still confident that you are the thing, or that there is anything that, that holds that line?
I won't say that I'm really completely confident. I do know that it takes good people doing things or doing the right thing to keep, democracy afloat. I always said that I call it Harryism, things that I like to hear, or the things that caught my ear. But until there's nothing that can be done, there's always something that can be done. And I believe that I'm trying to do my part. I can't do it alone, but hopefully I can inspire somebody, or somebody watching, or that'll read my book, or hear something that inspires them to want to do the right thing and actually believe in public service in the form of a police officer, and do it for the right reasons to actually help people and serve their communities. And that's what I'm talking about with just as a police officer. But it was 4 of us, I believe, 4 of us initially testified in the January 6th hearings. But what if none of us did? With that story, would the narrative of what officers have faced, would that be out there? Or would that just be, people were allowed to make up their own narrative about what happened? And hell, they're still doing it. Even watching the tapes and footage, people are still taking their own narratives and running with what happened, and which is totally false about what we went through. So that's why I think it's important for individuals to continue to stand up, speak out, and like the subtitle of my book, Get in Good Trouble, because it's necessary.
Do you see any parallels between your condemnation of, not even condemnation, but you're thinking about what your fellow officers did, or the lack of accountability, and what a lot of Black people see from the police, right? What happened to the leadership? Why are they not protecting us? We need to examine what happened in this specific incident. And sometimes we don't get the answers, the same answers that you're looking for. Do you see any parallels in that? And does it make you think about your job differently if you do?
It makes me motivated to want to do it better. And I understand that the fractured trust that is put on these institutions. I understand it, not just policing, but hell, look at Congress right now. It's so fractured and divided, and should we trust it? But what's the alternative? Turning it out and doing something? I don't know what a healthy, reasonable alternative is. So I think it's really important for us to flood it, have individuals get involved and get active, good, like-minded people. That's what a democracy is. And maybe I'm just this eternal optimist, but hope is the only thing that we have that keeps us going, man. I don't want to ever feel like, I feel like I'm defeated, but never to the point where I want to give up. And it may be completely asinine. Somebody looking at me like, yeah, this bro delusional. Maybe, man. But you know what? It keeps me getting up and doing that. The thought that I'm helping somebody and doing what's right. If I influence or inspire one person, then it was worth it. And hell, even if I don't inspire nobody, telling my story and continue to do, it helps me feel good about myself. Like I know I'm doing the right thing.
And I would argue, like, I guess everyone feels like that. I think it is your belief in what you are, in the thing that you are protecting. What do you hope that when someone finishes this book, what do you hope they take away from that?
So much. I talk about a lot. I immediately thought about my mental health chapter, and how important it is for people to embrace that it's okay to not be okay. But I think I want to answer this question a little bit different than that. I truly value mental health. It's especially amongst people of color, especially Black men. Fellas, it's all right, to not be okay. Continue to uphold each other and check on each other. But as far as, don't be quiet when you got a story to tell. Stand up and tell your story. People are going to push back against you. Look at it like war. And who gets to rewrite history? The winner of war is the person who tells, whose story gets told in history. But if we are willing to not even stand up and fight and have our story told at all, we don't have a chance at all. It's important to deflate the narrative on the other side that what happened on January 6th was legitimate political discourse. How dare you use those words when there were officers who were savagely and violently beaten, where there were people that were seeking out to hang the vice president, to kill Nancy Pelosi. I refuse to let that narrative be hijacked. The truth, we cannot let the truth be hijacked. And I will continue to tell my story and fight for the people who were responsible for the failures of that day, whether that be a chief of police, whether that be a congressman, whether that be the president of the United States. Any and everybody who had anything to do with the failures of that day needs to be held accountable. And that's why I have been adamant about not shutting up about it, even close to 3 years later.
Well, I want to thank you for coming. I got one last question, man. Like about 15 years ago, I know you're not part of the Pentagon police, but I made a wrong turn on an exit and got off at the Pentagon. And they searched my car and told me they had to, when I left, I realized I had a bunch of liquor in the back, in the trunk, because I was planning a party. I was on base planning a party. And one of my bottles of Henny was missing, man. So you think you can help me get my bottle of Henny back?
Man. Stop playing.
I'm for real, man. Yeah, man, they took one of the big bottles, one of the $64 bottles too, man.
Oh,
so
man.
I want you to look into that, man. I want you to look into that, man. Why
I'll make sure we rectify that problem, man. We can have a drink together if you be up for it, man. I'll make sure that happens.
Definitely, man. And while you're doing that, I'll be telling people not to forget to tune into theGrio, to download that GRIO app, to tell a friend about this podcast. And, one of the things we do on every episode is I usually leave the podcast or end the podcast with a Black saying. But, when I have a guest, I give them a chance to give us their favorite Black saying. Something your mama used to say, your grandma, or, your granddaddy used to say all the time that you've only heard Black people say. So, Mr. Dunn, tell us your favorite Black saying.
The first one that just came to mind is obviously, stop out there crying before I give you something to cry about.
That's perfect. You should have told that to the January 6 people. Okay. But I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for coming, man. I want to thank everybody for watching. Remember to tell your friends, download that GRIO app, and subscribe to this podcast. And remember, if you were there on January 6th, stop all that crying, for America gives you something to really cry about. We'll see you next time on the GRIO Daily. If you like what you heard, please give us a 5-star review, download the GRIO app, subscribe to the show, and share it with everyone you know. Please email all questions, suggestions, and compliments to podcast@theGrio.com.